Hey folks, let's review. The purpose of life is to find your purpose. Now, each of us will have a different purpose, but there will certainly be plenty of overlap. And for most of us, we will discover multiple purposes throughout our lifetimes. This is a philosophy, a path I have adhered to all my adult life. But the codification of this philosophy has a history, and I am about to bore you with it. So hold tight for a few moments. We'll get through this. There is, I dare say, a purpose to this. Sigmund Freud is the father of psychoanalysis. The idea that mental health can be achieved through a dialogue between a therapist and a client. He developed this in Vienna, his hometown, Vienna, Austria, in the 1890s. And to Freud, the purpose of life is pleasure. That the human organism is constantly seeking pleasure, and whatever gets in the way of that inevitably leads to conflict. Alfred Adler was his colleague and disciple. Eventually, he broke with Freud, and he developed his own theory, which he labeled individual psychology. To Adler, the purpose of life is power. To determine and maintain and negotiate your power in your life. And he focused on notions of inferiority, the competitive drive to assert a superiority, and hopefully this all resulting in harmony and health. Then comes my main man, Viktor Frankl. Like the two luminous names before him, Viktor was a Jew from Austria, and he came of age in World War II with all that that entails. He named his approach logotherapy, or the pursuit of meaning. Not reason as in critical thinking, although that's a large component of it. Reason as in the big question. Why are we here? What's the reason behind it all? So Freud, Adler, and Frankl. In this order, while all born roughly a generation away from each other. I'll wager that most of you haven't heard of one or even two names on this list, but the psychological, philosophical, and ontological movements they've inspired persist. In fact, they remain at the forefront of man's attempts to assign meaning to his life. It all comes down to pleasure, power, or purpose. Okay, so wipe that glazed look from your eyes. Boring history lesson over. In my dialogue with my clients, I routinely draw anecdotes from my own life and from lives of people that I know about. I firmly believe that redemption is available to all, that joy and purpose, that we can rise above our circumstances and shine our light to anyone. And with the wealth of my personal experiences, I also believe that I can relate to you, that I know what you're going through. A common retort to this is, I don't know, that I can't compare myself to others, especially people from a different neighborhood, another culture, another economic class, another ethnicity, another orientation. I rejected this argument at its core. My task as a human being is to unite us, not divide. My job is to acknowledge the obvious differences, like I just mentioned to you, and to celebrate them, but also to focus with a laser-sharp clarity all the things that we bear in common, like we share 99.9% of our DNA. We share the same dreams, hopes, aspirations, fears, anxieties. We have the same love of family and friends. We have the same drive to better our lot and that of those we care about. And when the person I'm speaking to insists that I cannot know, well, then I point to Viktor Frankl. Viktor lost everything. His parents, his wife, his brother, uncle, colleagues, friends, all murdered by the Nazis. And yet every day, Frankl would seek a way to put his burgeoning logotherapy theory into practice. Every day he would find a reason for happiness. Now think on this. Victor was in the Theresienstadt ghetto, and then Auschwitz. More horrible places in history I don't think can be named. And yet he found purpose. He found happiness there. A blade of grass poking tenaciously through the mud. A sky of azure blue. Children playing from outside the walls. For what did local children know of the horror going on within those walls? And Victor, like his fellow inmates, would be tagged for intensive labor details in the countryside, and they would be transported in trains, overstuffed boxcars of human cargo. And each boxcar had a centered slit for ventilation, and for which the inmates would jockey for position to capture a glimpse of the rushing countryside. Well, when Victor had his opportunity, he would focus quickly on a grove of trees or a bank of clouds on the distant Tatra mountains, and he would accrue this purpose and joy, store it up. When the war is over, Victor had the belief that he and his wife Tilly would reunite. This was not to be. Hitler and the Axis powers were defeated, yes, but so too was the Frankel family. The only other Frankel to survive was his sister, Stella, and she was a refugee in Australia. Victor was utterly alone. But he found joy. He created purpose. He discovered, proved that logotherapy was real. Its theoretical and theological underpinnings, an unqualified success. He underwent this most horrific of torture and degradation, and now we don't have to. He proved that among all the life forms on this planet, only one has the ability to choose its response to any stimuli: humanity. To briefly complete his story, Victor married again. He sired a daughter who had children of her own, and he drew his last breath in 1997 at the age of 92 in his beloved Vienna. He had a professorship at the University of Vienna, and he had retired 10 years earlier, but he continued to lecture and to write. In fact, he authored 39 books, one of which, The Will to Meaning, is the one book that every single person in this planet, on this planet, should read or have read to them. One of the most fascinating things about Victor's teachings is that I had come to the same conclusions about my life before I had even heard of him. And then I did. And then my life was never the same. So, you ask, how do we get here? How do we find this will to meaning? Better yet, how do we motivate ourselves to search for this will to meaning? How do we realize and accept that this is a worthwhile pursuit? Perhaps the most worthwhile pursuit of all. Well, that's simple. With gratitude. To build up and store personal stores of gratitude. I absolutely guarantee you that every single person on this planet is surrounded with reasons every day to be profoundly grateful. And I will tell you all about it next week. So, until then, peace